Arriving today at the port city of Alexandria in Egypt is some precious cargo. 60 tons of timber to be used in a highly unusual experiment. A team of archaeologists and builders is attempting to recreate one of the great wonders of ancient Egypt. Egypt is filled with spectacular wonders. Temples, pyramids, tombs, all built on an enormous scale thousands of years ago. But the ancient pharaoh's engineers may have mastered another kind of wonder, one they don't usually get credit for. Fantastic seagoing ships.
When people think about Egypt, they think about pyramids, they think about King Tut, they think about tombs. They might think about the Nile, but they never think about the Egyptians as a seafaring people, and they should.
But how exactly did the Egyptians become master shipbuilders 3,500 years ago? Pulling together all the ancient evidence, archaeologist Cheryl Ward and her team will try to design, build, and sail a seagoing ship just like the pharaohs.
I wanted to show that by using the archaeological evidence, we could build a ship in Egyptian style with Egyptian construction and succeed.
Direct evidence of Egypt's seafaring exploits is hard to come by, but some pharaohs left intriguing clues. One of the most spectacular journeys was described here, at the sprawling funerary temple of the pharaoh Hatshepsut, who ruled around 1500 BC. Carved onto the temple walls are 5 massive seagoing ships, setting out on the Red Sea and returning loaded with luxury items. The epic journey was proclaimed a triumph. One that could solidify the power of the pharaoh behind it. Especially if that pharaoh were a woman. Hatshepsut started out as a queen, married to a pharaoh. When he died, his son from another wife was just a young child.
Hatshepsut became the regent, or guardian acting head of state, for this 4-year-old child, but she stepped into the role as a full king.
If Hatshepsut wanted to retain full power as pharaoh, she would have to win the support of the temple priests. One way to do that was to deliver one of the most prized commodities of ancient Egypt, incense. It was used constantly in temple ceremonies, a gift to the gods.
The Egyptians used a lot of incense. It was scarce. It didn't come from Egypt. They had to get it from their faraway contacts. If Hatshepsut could get the priests the incense they craved and needed, she would establish herself as a strong, effective, and powerful leader.
Back then, the best source for incense, like frankincense and myrrh, was a land called Punt. No one knows exactly where Punt was.
What we know about Punt is the materials that came back from Punt.
Things like ivory, ostrich eggs, giraffe and panther skins could all have come from an area hundreds of miles south of Egypt, in what is today Sudan or Eritrea. To get there on the turbulent Red Sea, Hatshepsut would need tough, seagoing ships. But how could the Egyptians manage to build such vessels? That's what Cheryl wants to find out. She's organized a team of experts. An Egyptian archaeologist, Mohammed Abdelmagid, and Tom Vosmer, an American who specializes in reconstructing ancient ships.
I'd like to talk to Mohammed about how much this has changed since it's got here.
The building itself will mostly be done by the Lachma family, several brothers who run a shipyard about 50 miles from Alexandria. and have a lot of experience with modern wooden boats. They're led by Maruz and Reda. Their oldest worker, Mossad, is the most familiar with traditional building techniques and tools like the adze, achieving amazing precision with a simple, sharp tool. And they seem fearless about their toes. The team's first task is shaping and assembling the ship's keel, the central bottom line of the ship's hull. The keel acts as a spine that everything else will be built around.
Every boat that's ever been built begins with laying the keel, and the precision with which these shipwrights work with these very simple tools, levers, wedges, strings with the plumb bob.
The shipwrights are using the plumb bob to make sure the enormous pieces of wood are in precisely the right place. The laying of the keel is a ritual this ship shares with most others, even modern ones. But once that's done, these shipwrights will be heading into unfamiliar waters. Because ancient Egyptian vessels were structurally nothing like today's boats. Very few ancient boats have survived the millennia since pharaonic times, but one that has is absolutely spectacular. It was found at the most famous site in Egypt, the Giza Plateau, where 3 pharaohs built some of the biggest tombs in the world, along with the Great Sphinx. The pharaoh Khufu started the project about 4,500 years ago, with the Great Pyramid. At its foot, archaeologists uncovered a boat-shaped pit. Inside was a pile of wood. When the scraps were assembled, this elegant boat, which may have been used in Khufu's funeral, took shape. The fantastically preserved Khufu boat shows the incredible precision of the ancient shipwrights and reveals an unusual construction technique, vastly different from how ships are made today.
Modern ships are built very differently from ancient ships. Modern ships get their strengths from the frames. The frames are set up on a keel. They act like a skeleton for a thin skin of planking that's nailed on the outside.
But none of the old Egyptian boats were built this way.
But look at these timbers, aren't they amazing?
On Khufu's boat, there's no obvious skeleton. Instead, it's all skin. The thick, irregularly shaped planks fit together like a jigsaw puzzle, held not with nails, but with mortise and tenon joints. And, as this model shows, to add more support, rope was threaded through the planks and tightened to keep them from sliding apart. Building these kinds of boats required massive pieces of wood.
I'm quite overwhelmed by the size of the timbers. I think it's an incredible amount of wood.
Egypt has never been a great place to find giant trees. The pharaohs built their boats with enormous cedar trunks imported from Lebanon. But today, the cedars of Lebanon are rare, so all this wood came from Europe.
These trees, which were cut in France, they are about 120 years old. We chose to use Douglas fir because its physical properties are most like the ancient cedar.
But even if we have the right kind of wood, how can we know what this ship looked like? Khufu's boat is a masterpiece of nautical engineering and contains lots of clues. But this slender, graceful boat was never meant for sea travel. It's a ceremonial rowboat that floated only on the Nile River.
And then you've got this massive one. And I really think
We want to build something much more substantial, a sturdy, seagoing sailing ship. But evidence of these boats is much more elusive. To find some clues, Cheryl Ward and ancient boat expert Tom Vosmer head south from Cairo, boarding a train to Luxor. Their destination, the grand funerary temple of the pharaoh Hatshepsut, built about 1,000 years after the Great Pyramids. Here, the ancient wall reliefs show up best at night. A series of carvings show several large sailing ships at different stages of a journey. Their crew, rigging, and cargo shown in amazing detail, even after 3,500 years.
This is absolutely amazing, isn't it?
It's stunning. It's just stunning. The detail is so precise. These are seagoing ships. They're great seagoing ships. They're huge. They are work ships. They're not covered with fancy paintings. They don't have elaborate pavilions on them. They do not have ribbons and flags. They have people who are rowing, people who are sailing. They have cargoes piled up. They are a veritable treasure house of information about the seafaring of ancient Egypt.
According to the inscriptions here, the ships were sent by the pharaoh Hatshepsut to journey to a faraway land called Punt, or God's Land, thought to be about 800 miles down the coast of the Red Sea. But even with these elaborate pictures, some historians still find it hard to believe that the Egyptians could have pulled off such an ambitious journey.
In spite of the details on the reliefs, modern scholars still argued constantly about where Punt was. They didn't understand how the Egyptian technology would have let them get there. And there were some people who said they were just ships on the Nile, that they never went to sea.
Cheryl wants to prove, once and for all, that the doubters are wrong. With the help of a naval architect, she turns one of Hatshepsut's two-dimensional ships into a 3D model and starts designing the 66-foot-long replica, plank by plank.
There are a lot of difficulties right now because there are literally thousands of decisions to be made. How long is this plank? How wide is this plank? What angle should this shape be? Every plank is unique. We have about 45 planks on each side, and they all fit together in an interlocking way.
Back at his workshop, Tom Vosmer starts making a scale model, carving each tiny plank to fit with its neighbors.
One of the amazing things, I think in Western minds anyway, is that there's no skeleton to build this boat around. We build the whole plank first. And the planks, the shapes of these planks that I'm working on now actually determines the shape of the hull, not the shape of any frames or molds or anything like that.
It's like a puzzle. We have to put it together, and each piece must fit exactly to the other to keep the water out and the ship floating.
It's very confusing me now. Basically what I'm doing right now is just experimenting with how those pieces go together and how we need to cut them. You can see, for example, this piece is cut 2 angles here, it's curved here, it's cut here, it's got a little hook there and another angle there. So really very, very complex 3-dimensional puzzle.
Working out a 3-dimensional puzzle with tiny scraps of wood is one thing. But how will the plan work with full-scale timbers? When Tom presents his model to the Lachma brothers, things become a bit more clear.
That's the initial few strakes of planking.
Very nice,
Trying
Tom.
to understand how these all fit together. These two were very easy. This one is easy. These two, very difficult. I think with this model, they have been able to see in the 3 dimensions what is perhaps a little bit confusing in 2 dimensions, but now they can translate it completely from the drawing to this, and they're going, aha, this is how it works. They understand the complexity of it. They understand the joinery. There's nobody's built a ship like this in thousands of years.
The shipwrights are used to working in wood, but they've never built a boat of this design, where each giant plank will have a unique shape.
Each plank is sculpted to fit exactly in place. That means that you take your piece of wood, you don't bend it, because they did not bend the wood. They carved it just like you would carve a statue.
And it's not just the jigsaw puzzle structure of the ship that's new to the builders. They've got to attach the pieces together in a completely different way from modern boats. And it's still got to be secure enough so that even on rough seas, the boat won't fall apart. So how did the ancients do it? On the Khufu boat, the planks were held together by a combination of mortise and tenon joints and rope lashing. But how were Hatshepsut's ship planks held together? There's no way to tell from the reliefs. What's needed are remains from actual seagoing vessels. For years, Cheryl and other marine archaeologists have been diving along Egypt's coastlines, in both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, searching for ancient Egyptian shipwrecks. They all came up empty-handed.
I looked underwater for the remains of Egyptian seagoing ships, and we found nothing but sand.
But now, some striking new discoveries could finally provide the answer. The location is the desert site of Mersa Gawasis, about 100 miles northeast of the temples of Luxor, and right on the shores of the Red Sea. Just recently, archaeologists started uncovering amazing artifacts here, all related to ancient Egyptian seafaring. More than a dozen stone anchors are found at the site. When Cheryl is invited to visit, more surprises await inside a series of man-made caves.
As you walk around some of the rockfall, suddenly you realize that on the floor are coils of rope that have not a grain of sand on them, laying there just like the Egyptians left them about 3,800 years ago. They're perfectly preserved.
It's absolutely the most rope that anyone's ever seen from ancient Egypt. It looks as if it was made yesterday. It looks exactly like modern rope.
Catherine Bard, one of the lead archaeologists here, finds more clues in the sand nearby. A pile of wooden crates, 3,800 years old.
We found an inscription on one of the boxes that in translation said, "The wonderful things of Punt." So that could not be a better answer to what they were used for. There's no question in my mind that this was a harbor from where the Punt expeditions were sent, and that they arrived back successfully with the wonderful things of Punt.
Punt was the place Hatshepsut claimed to have sent several ships to gather luxury goods. The boxes and rope are fantastic discoveries for lead archaeologists Catherine Bard and Rodolfo Fatovich. But for Cheryl, the most intriguing finds are several large planks of wood found scattered around the camp, buried in the sand. They might not look like much, but to Cheryl's expert eye, their peculiar shapes fit right into the ancient drawings of Egyptian ships.
Which part of the boat is this one?
This is from the Punt reliefs, of course. And what we see is this is the plank that can fit exactly here. And it touches here on the center strake.
Plank after plank is uncovered, riddled with holes. Holes drilled not by tools, but by shipworms. Shipworms are actually saltwater mollusks that burrow into submerged wood.
They're riddled with shipworm. Shipworms are only found in the sea. When I look at these planks, I know they're from seagoing ships.
This is what Cheryl has been looking for years. Physical evidence of a Pharaoh's seagoing vessel.
Every piece of wood that we find here tells us so much more than we ever knew. Even if we had only one piece, it would tell a new story.
One of the amazing stories these planks tell is how the Egyptian shipwrights joined their planks together. The thick planks have mortise holes for double rows of mortise and tenon joints. But unlike the Khufu riverboat, there are no holes for lashing the planks together with rope. Cheryl is intent on following the ancient evidence, so this is the method the Lachma family will use on our replica ship. Giant, thick pieces of timber, carefully carved and held together with lots and lots of mortise and tenon joints.
Now they're marking and they'll plane a little bit more, make it a tighter fit, a closer fit.
With nothing tying the planks together, no one really knows if this boat will hold up once it hits the high seas. And the builders and Tom are wondering, with this strange ancient ship design, how will they keep the water out?
Trying to understand how to keep the inside of a ship dry preoccupies everybody who has any kind of boat at any time.
Today's wooden ships are made watertight with caulking. Natural materials like cotton or synthetics like silicone are hammered and squeezed into the joints between the planks. But the ancient planks Cheryl has seen seem clean.
I have never seen any evidence of caulking. No material, no tool marks, nothing that would show that the Egyptians would have pounded material in between their plank seams like you do on a modern boat.
The lack of caulking troubles Tom. Without it, he fears the joints won't be tight enough to hold out the water, especially if the ship is being jostled by rough sea waves. But Cheryl has her own plan.
Our plan is to sink the ship after it's built, to let it sit submerged in water for 2 weeks, allowing the planks to swell around their joint and seal the joints more tightly together to keep the water out.
For this method to have any chance of making the ship watertight, the joints before swelling need to be nearly perfect. At the shipyard, seeing water poured onto the joints, Tom is feeling less confident in the plan.
I just can't believe that there's no caulking whatsoever. There must have been something. It's almost inevitable, I think. I don't see how you can get a perfect fit over these oddly shaped planks with the thickness they are without something in there. And well, the archaeological evidence is thousands of years old. Something could have disappeared.
Tom is painfully aware of the importance of a watertight ship. The last boat he built sank on its maiden voyage.
It's a very strange feeling as your feet sort of leave the deck and you get lighter and lighter and suddenly the boat's not there supporting you anymore. It's a very strange feeling, rather frightening as well.
Despite Tom's fears, the shipwrights forge ahead. Over several months, the extended Lachma family works away at the boat's hull. Shipbuilding skills are passed on from parent to child, just as they were in ancient times. The Lachmas are carrying on a tradition that stretches back thousands of years in Egypt. Since the very beginning, so much of Egyptian life revolved around the water.
The Egyptian civilization grew up along the Nile. For thousands of years, people lived on its banks and they crossed its waters. They used the water as a highway. The Egyptians weren't isolated, though. They didn't only focus on the Nile. They were part of a globalized system.
According to ancient inscriptions, even during the Old Kingdom, 4,500 years ago, in the age of the pyramids, Egypt was already actively trading with other cultures. Wood from Lebanon, wine and olive oil, also from the Eastern Mediterranean. But experts have debated whether the Egyptians used their own boats or relied on foreign shipbuilders. Some believe that the Egyptian approach to boat building wouldn't be good enough for sea travel. Now, we have a chance to find out if a ship held together almost exclusively with mortise and tenon joints will be sturdy enough for the Red Sea. As the hull nears completion, the team gets an important new member. Long-distance sailor David Van will serve as the ship's captain, if it ever makes it into the water. David is immediately struck by the shape of the hull.
My first impression was that it looked like a giant wooden salad bowl, and a really beautiful one. I've never sailed anything like this. This is the kind of boat they were sailing up to 4,000 years ago. But compared to a boat now, of course, the technical term would be a pig. We would call it a pig now. You know, it's a beamy, heavy, short, fat boat that's going to move terribly through the water.
Modern sailboats are narrower, with pointy keels that help grip the water and keep them from capsizing. This rounded hull looks like it could roll right over. But the round, tubby shape isn't David's only concern.
I'm a little worried about this. I had a crack once in a boat, just a little hairline crack. And the title of my book about it is A Mile Down, because that boat sank in 5,000 feet of water, a big 90-foot, very strong steel boat, because of a little crack. And these are really big cracks. As a captain, you're really not ever supposed to go to sea in something that you think could possibly break. And so, for the sake of the project, I'm doing something which is kind of different than I would normally do, and I'm really worried about that. If we could just dip the whole thing in epoxy, it'd be really great. But I'm not sure they were using epoxy systems 4,000 years ago. So we'll see.
The team is still determined to make the ship sound without any epoxy. Following the ancient ship evidence, the shipwrights add a series of horizontal beams. They'll support the deck, but more importantly, they'll help lock together the jigsaw puzzle pieces of the hull. It's just about time to find out if this ship can be made watertight.
The first thing we want to do is sink the boat, let it fill with water, let everything swell, and then we'll pump the water out of the inside and see if it is watertight. Maybe we need to do something else, and at that point we decide what to do.
For the shipwrights, getting the boat to this moment, when it is moved into the Nile for the first time, is a huge accomplishment.
Launching this boat is a truly wonderful thing for us. And God willing, if we can do this, we can meet any difficult challenge.
But it's hard to maintain a celebratory mood when your ship quickly fills with water and sinks into the river. Of course, according to Cheryl, this is all part of the plan. Still, to some crew members, it comes as a surprise.
Why is the boat full of water?
Who said it wouldn't fill with water? It has to fill with water.
Cheryl thinks the sinking of new ships was the norm for the Egyptians. But launching into the Red Sea was even more complicated because the ships weren't built anywhere near the coast. According to ancient inscriptions, seafaring ships were built on the Nile River, 90 miles from the sea.
This was just incredible. What the Egyptians did was to completely build a ship on the Nile, then take it apart. Every single piece was disassembled. They loaded those disassembled pieces on donkeys, and with a train of men and donkeys in the thousands, walked across 90 miles of desert to reach the shores of the Red Sea.
It wasn't easy at all. One inscription describes an expedition to Oasis of 3,756 men.
It's no wonder Hatshepsut bragged about this. It's a huge, huge undertaking.
At the boatyard, the crew is dealing with their own huge undertaking. For weeks, the ship sits in the Nile River, filled with water. Today, the crew starts to pump the water out. By the end of the day, the boat is high and dry. The question is, will it stay that way? Unfortunately, it doesn't. The ship is still riddled with leaks.
We have a problem. At first everything was going really, really well, but now...
Do you think the archaeologists were crazy not to have reacted earlier? Even though they were aware of the problem and did nothing to fix it?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mahros. You answer that one.
The thing is, it's not a question of them being ignorant or anything. We expected the wood to swell more than it did. So it's because of the wood.
The plan has not worked, and there's not much agreement about why. Some crew members blame the condition of the wood. Others say the joints weren't tight enough, or it was crazy to build the boat without caulking in the first place. Whatever the reason, if they want the ship to float, they've got to get it out of the water and find a way to plug the holes. Tom immediately pushes to caulk the seams.
So this linen fiber.
Yeah.
I wonder what would happen if we put this between our planks.
The Egyptians definitely had linen, and at the Red Sea camp at Oasis, archaeologist Catherine Bard even found scraps of it buried in the sand.
We have excavated a lot of tiny fragments of linen at the site, so possibly linen was used to stick into the cracks.
The builders decide to use a combination of linen strips with soft beeswax. We don't know for sure if the Egyptians used this technique, but the materials were definitely available to them.
Beeswax is a natural product. We know the Egyptians used it on their coffins. They used it on their furniture. We see it used as a fixative for the paints. So I felt comfortable using natural fiber and beeswax just to fill the gaps. And it's working very well.
This time, when the ship hits the water, the seams hold. The hull is finally finished and floating, but it's not about to go anywhere. For that, it'll need some rigging. Fortunately, Hatshepsut's reliefs show the ropes and sails in fantastic detail. And ancient ship models found in Egyptian tombs provide more clues. The whole arrangement is known as a square rig, and it's very different from most of today's sailboats.
The Egyptian rig is really simple. There's a central mast. There are two long pieces of wood, we call yards, that spread the sail, and lots and lots and lots of rope.
Today, rope is still made by traditional methods in the streets near the shipyard, by twisting together plant fibers.
You say they've done this for hundreds of years?
Yes, the same. The exact same way.
And of course, they'll need a sail. To hold all this in place, the ship requires a sturdy mast. This massive tree trunk weighs just about a ton. The shipwrights get it aboard with just a ramp and a couple of ropes. Next comes the rigging. The mast has to hold and organize the web of ropes that will support the yardarms and sail. According to Hatshepsut's reliefs, the top of the mast was rigged with a masthead, outfitted with metal loops that held more than a dozen ropes. The team has replicated the design on our full-size mast, and now it's time to thread the loops.
It's such strange rigging. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. This is based on the relief. It's just a brand new experience. I've never seen anything like it.
With all the ropes finally looped through the masthead, now they have a much tougher task, getting the mast upright.
So what we're doing is getting ready to put the keel of the mast in this very small hole.
For a modern ship, this would be done easily with a crane. But we're just using ropes, and as many guys as we can find at the shipyard. The boat is built, and David Van is eager to find out if it's truly seaworthy.
Now it's yours.
Though the ancient Egyptians took their ships apart and loaded the pieces on donkeys for the journey to the Red Sea, our boat will stay in one piece and get a ride on an 18-wheeler. As it's transported from the Nile shipyard to a Red Sea port near Mersa Oasis, reality starts to set in. Tom Vosmer has no idea how the boat will perform.
I am a little bit afraid, yes. We don't know the boat, we don't know the conditions, we've never sailed this kind of boat before. It's silly not to be afraid.
One of the big fears is that the boat, with a high center of gravity and a round hull, might easily tip over. To make the ship more stable, the crew stows about 9 tons of sand to act as ballast.
This boat requires a huge amount of ballast. It's very important because it gives us stability when we're sailing so we don't tip over too much and dip a rail and turtle and sink. It's slightly important.
I'm most concerned about stability. I have no idea what's going to happen when we get on the ship. In some ways, I'm terrified.
Finally, the moment has arrived to take the ship out into open water on the Red Sea and find out if it can hold up. Soon after the boat is towed from the dock, the stability fears seem justified.
Don't enhance it. Hey, you guys, come on. I don't like the way this feels.
Things don't feel much better when the crew tries out the oars.
Okay, so let's row now.
Hope. Hope.
Yeah.
Hope.
This thing rocks a lot.
Hope.
No one wants the ship to capsize and sink, but just in case disaster strikes, a support boat is always nearby.
So now we're going to try to raise the sail and have just 3 rowers on each side.
Everyone is anxious to get the sail up. Maybe the forward momentum will reduce the rocking.
Just learning how to raise a sail is a challenge because this very, very heavy sail and yard had to be hauled up without the help of pulleys.
Sail's picking up water.
Then, suddenly, as the sail fills with wind, everything changes.
I just feel stunned as the sail goes up and the wind catches it. I just can't believe it's actually sailing.
Yeah, well, I want to just go straight downwind first, see how that is, what the speed is, and then we can change a little, see how the speed is.
Captain David Van points our ship southward.
Let's turn to port a little bit.
Most scholars agree this is the direction Hatshepsut's boats would have sailed. Though the exact location of ancient Punt is still a mystery, it was most likely hundreds of miles down the African coast. For most of the year, the wind blows from the north.
To sail south along the African coast of the Red Sea is easy. The prevailing wind is at your back. It pushes you along in a nice, simple path, and you end up at Punt.
Our crew won't be sailing that far, but they'll sail as far as they can in the right direction. And up to now, the ship is performing well.
I am thrilled. I had no idea how smooth, how easy it would feel to be on the ship with this glorious ancient sail.
I'm really impressed. The thing is tracking well. We got the wind coming from just after the beam. We're making good speed. Can't complain about that.
To everyone's surprise, even with a rounded hull, the boat manages to stay on course. The credit probably goes to a pair of giant steering oars lashed to the stern of the ship.
This is really impressive.
I've never sailed anything like this at all, but what I'm amazed at is that it feels like a modern boat. It's very solid, very stable, moves well. It amazes me that they had this 4,000 years ago, because it's not a bad sailboat even today. Don't pull hard on
The trip is beginning to seem easy. Maybe too easy. Then, one night, the weather turns and the wind comes up. It's clear that the Red Sea has a bigger test in store for the ship and its crew.
Most of us didn't sleep last night with how much it was rocking really wildly, and there was a lot of wind. And today there's too much wind to do the full sail. There's about 20 knots of wind, and that's too much for our mainsail.
With much stronger winds putting too much force on the large sail, the cotton cloth could rip, so the crew will try out a smaller sail they brought along.
Not a lucky turn of events for us, because we've only had a couple days on this boat, and it'd be nice if the conditions could remain a little lighter. So we'll see.
I was really apprehensive. The waves are 10 feet high in some cases, and we had no idea how the ship would respond. It was scary.
Where's your life jacket? Life jacket!
We don't really have solid information on how far over this boat has to go to turtle and really go over. And we took some water over the port rail, so that was certainly exciting.
Okay, we need to do something pretty quickly here.
Even though the ship, held together with just wood and rope, creaks and groans, it manages to weather the storm. And despite the rocking, it surfs gracefully over the crests of the waves. The ship is sailing faster than anyone expected, so Cheryl thinks the trip to Punt might have taken just a month. Getting back would have taken longer. With the winds from the north, the Egyptians may have had to row back, or they might have sailed in a circle around the opposite coast of the Red Sea. Either way, the crew is convinced this ship could handle the journey.
Probably the thing that will stick with me the most is just the thrill of surfing down those waves and just feeling the whole boat move and the power it had and the incredible power that sail has. I mean, we were doing 7 knots sometimes, and it was really good fun. Yeah.
And though he called it a pig, Captain David Vann is amazed at how safe and effective the ship feels.
What I love about this rig is that it's incredibly easy to sail downwind. It's my favorite boat I've ever sailed on, and that includes many modern boats for sailing downwind. I think it's wonderful. I think it's fun to sail. I would sail across an ocean with this. I think it's fun.
I'm ecstatic. We showed that a ship built with ancient technology, based as much as possible on duplicating archaeological evidence, can easily sail the Red Sea. No one can argue that Egyptian technology wasn't sufficient for that. In fact, they've got to rethink their whole approach to understanding seafaring in the ancient world.
The ancient Egyptians have always been honored as kings of the Nile. But now, finally, they can be celebrated as masters of the sea.